once.
You wish.
And Taufik, I think we haven't met before, so it's great to meet you.
Thank you. Well, we hope that we'll have the opportunity to meet in person in the coming weeks or months.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, you're part of the world in general sense. I'm in Jordan, so Arab world.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you and to meet the rest of the speakers and the panelists. Marius, I'm hearing the bell here ringing 12 noon in Paris. Marius is on mute.
To celebrate the International Day for Universal Access to Information on September 28th, join UNESCO to build back better, thanks to access to information. Not only is access to information a basic human right, it also represents a key pillar for resilient and inclusive knowledge societies, as well as sustainable development. Protecting and promoting access to information improves transparent governance, helps protect our health, reduces inequalities, contributes to sustainable development, strengthens resilience, and addresses climate change. When we have to face a global crisis, whether it concerns our health or saving our planet, it becomes vital to have what the Sustainable Development Goals urge us to achieve, namely public access to information and fundamental freedoms as part of our future. Access to Information Day 2021 will highlight the role of access to information laws and, vitally, their actual implementation to build back effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions for the public good. It will focus on how countries need specialized and strong oversight bodies to ensure that governments make information available proactively, as well as to respond to public queries. Each citizen should take ownership of their right to information to ensure that they can make informed decisions. And with regards to the best interests of humanity and the earth we live on. On September 28th and 29th, join our series of webinars and all the online events organized by UNESCO and its partners across the world to protect and celebrate our right to access information. Please visit our website for more information.
Good morning. Welcome to the celebration of the International Day for Universal Access to Information. I am Eduardo Bertoni. I'm currently the representative and coordinator of the Regional Office for South America of the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights, and I have the great honor to be the moderator of the first panel of this celebration. I am very honored also to introduce Mr. Taufik Jelassi, Assistant Director General for Communication and Information of UNESCO. And I would like to ask Mr. Jelassi to give us some words for celebrating this day. Mr. Jelassi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you as we celebrate the 2021 International Day for Universal Access to Information. This special day is an occasion for all of us to join forces in building back better with access to information, which is, as you know, the theme for this year's edition. Access to information is a fundamental human right, essential to safeguard the rule of law and enable the full enjoyment of other human rights. Accordingly, this year, UNESCO has chosen to highlight the importance of access to information laws and their effective implementation to uphold the vision of information as a universal public good. As of this past August, 132 UN member states had adopted constitutional guarantees or enacted access to information laws. This is a major achievement, but more can still be done to extend this fundamental right to all countries worldwide. We must encourage governments to adopt access to information laws and support the implementation of such guarantees when they already exist. Importantly, we must also ensure that capacities and resources exist to ensure that legal frameworks translate into real access to information and thus real benefits for citizens. Because when people have access to information, they have access to opportunities. Access to information ensures transparent governance, catalyzes innovation, fosters resilience, and promotes learning. Overall, access to information is necessary for us to progress on sustainable development. As the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, access to reliable and verified information, both online and offline, is today more vital than ever before. Our lives come to depend on sharing accurate information that encourages healthy and safe behaviors. As the global community mobilizes to build back better in the post-COVID-19 era, we must continue our efforts to ensure the universal access to information as a key driver for sustainable development and to build the resilience in the face of today's and tomorrow's global crises and challenges. This past year, UNESCO, as the custodian agency for monitoring the SDG 16.10.2 indicator, UNESCO launched a survey on public access to information, gathering responses for more than 100 countries. The survey results will be presented during the upcoming webinars. They show real progress and demonstrate the role of specialized oversight institutions helping countries to perform better in implementing their access to information laws. Mesdames et messieurs, le droit fondamental de tous...
Ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental rights of all people, citizens, to receive informations that are good for the public interest have to be guaranteed. A greater openness and a greater transparency also brings advantages to citizens and governments by fostering confidence and trust and encouraging a better management of archives, allowing one to take informed decisions, and by being a guarantee against corruption. The oversight agencies also play an important role by fostering the protection and promotion of public access to information as fundamental pillars of good governance. This role has to be recognized fully, and these institutions have to be strengthened with funds, resources, and staff in order to contribute to efficient functioning. Finally, I'd like to thank our partners who've contributed to organizing this International Day this year and with whom we are working hand in hand in order to promote universal access to information. The Network for Defending Public Freedoms, the Open Government Partnership, the Conference of Information Commissaires, and the International Network of Libraries and Librarians and Institutions. Thank you all for your very precious contributions. It is only by working together that we'll be able to guarantee together universal access to information. This is something we truly need in order to create inclusive knowledge societies that are resilient, and in order to fulfill the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. I wish you excellent celebrations of this International Day for Universal Access to Information. I also wish you have fruitful discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Taufik Jelassi, Assistant Director General for Communication and Information of UNESCO. And I would like to say thanks to UNESCO as well for supporting all of this year, the development and enjoyment of these important human rights. Thank you very much, Mr. Jelassi. We have a very interesting and exciting panel for the first activity of the celebration of the International Day for Universal Access to Information. For those who just joined us, I'm Eduardo Bertoni. I will be the moderator of this panel. I'm currently the representative and coordinator of the Regional Office for South America of the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights. This panel, of course, is part of the celebration of this day. The main motto or the main title of this day was heard or was mentioned by the video that we saw at the very beginning. And this panel title is Access to Information Laws During the Decade of Action, Trends and Challenge. I have the pleasure to moderate this panel. We'll be joined by Mr. Toby Mendel, Executive Director of the Center for Law and Democracy and the Chair of FOIANet. He is from Canada. Ms. Anna Brandt, current Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Sweden to the OECD and UNESCO, and it is the IPDC Chair. Welcome, Ms. Ambassador. Mr. Toby McIntosh, who is at the steering committee of FOIANet, is from the USA, an old advocate for access to information. Welcome, Toby McIntosh. And finally, Ms. Ilvana Tachi, Secretary to the Tromsø Convention, DG of Human Rights and Rule of Law of the Council of Europe. Some comments about this panel. This panel will be run in two different sections. The first one, we will hear our great panelists. I will ask our panelists to speak only for 5 to 6 minutes, no more than that. That will be the first part of our panel. And then we will have a discussion with our panelists. I will put on the table some questions to generate some discussion, and the goal is to have a dynamic panel with interactions between all of you, my fellow panelists. And after this second round of discussions, and please keep your comments in 1 to 2 minutes, we will ask the audience to put some questions to our panelists, and hopefully we will finish on time. So I would like to ask first Mr. Toby Mendel, Executive Director of the Center for Law and Democracy, a Canadian-based international human rights NGO that provides legal and capacity-building expertise regarding foundational rights for democracy, including the right to information, and he's also the chair of FOIANet. Mr. Mendel we will do some introductory comments on the main trends and challenge we are observing in the recent years in terms of adoption and implementation of access to information legislation. Toby, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Let me start by apologizing a little bit for the lighting in this room. I'm at an in-person event in Jordan, and for purposes of this meeting, they put me in this room that I've never been in before, so I can't control about the lighting, but hopefully you can see me okay. Since I was going to say the first speaker, but Taufik was really the first speaker, but early speaker, I want to just highlight, before I get into the issue of the legal developments, a little bit the strengths that access to information, or the right to information, as we like to call it, has gone through over the last couple of decades. Mr. Taufik mentioned 132 countries, UN members. We count 135, including 3 non-UN members. Our numbers are the same. During that time, it has been recognized under international law as a human right, part of the general right to freedom of expression, and very, very important development. Now, as has been mentioned, it's recognized in the Sustainable Development Goals, and it has a specific indicator, the adoption and implementation of laws as part of the SDGs. And just a couple of years ago, it was declared as an official UN Day. UNESCO had declared it a few years before that. So it's really, I think we can see that this right has become more and more established and recognized globally. And I think it's wonderful to be celebrating that on this day. In terms of legislative developments, going back to 2018, we can see that year there were 5 new laws, adding up to the total of 135, and quite diverse in their distribution. 1 in Europe, 1 in the Pacific, 1 in the Caribbean, 1 in Africa, and 1 in the Middle East and North Africa. So all over the place. In 2019, before COVID, there was only 1 new law, and that was in Africa. In 2020, so during COVID, only 1 new law as well in the Middle East and North Africa. And so far already in 2021, we have 3 new laws, 2 in Africa and 1 in the MENA region. So I think it's very difficult to draw any kind of firm conclusions from that. We can see that the rate of adoption is not as much as it was during the last 2 decades, when it was 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 laws per year. But, COVID impacted us. Something happened in 2019. Hard to really draw firm conclusions. In terms of the strength, again, of these new laws, just since 2018, very mixed bag. The 3 laws over this period from the MENA region, it's an impressive contribution from MENA, a lot of laws from the small region, of course, a region which doesn't have as many laws as other regions. The laws are all on the weaker side, I would say. The 4 laws from Africa, again, strong region in terms of new laws, range from, on our assessment tool, which a perfect law would get a score of 150 points. They range from 84 points, so a medium strength law, to 127, which would be the 6th strongest law in the world. So, strong performance there from Africa. And the other laws range quite a bit in terms of strength too. Again, I don't really have any strong conclusions to draw in terms of the strength of laws. We had for a while noticed that laws, on average, new laws were getting stronger and stronger, but I think that in the current crop, we can't quite say that. In terms of the area of strength, we see a continuation that the scope of the laws, how broad their coverage is, particularly in terms of the public authorities they cover, that's the strongest area for almost all of these new laws. They tend to be quite broad in scope. That's very positive, of course. The issue of appeals, if you are denied access to information, what sort of appeal is available to you? That's the area where we see the biggest variety, the biggest variance among the new laws. And basically, countries which create a new administrative body, an information commission or commissioner, those countries do well in that area, and those laws which don't create a body like that do poorly in that area. So that explains the variance there. And surprisingly, I would say the procedures, so the rules by which you may lodge a request, how you can do that, and the obligations for public bodies in responding to requests, how long they have, the fees they can charge, set of factors there. That's a relatively easy area to do well, but I would say that the new laws are not doing that well in that area, even though we now know exactly what procedures are needed, and so and even though it's not very controversial, exceptions is much more controversial normally than procedures, but laws are medium in that area. Moving on now to talk a little bit about the COVID impact. And we saw during COVID, a lot of countries effectively suspended their laws, either legally, so they passed a law or a rule that allowed that suspension, or just illegally. They just did it, even though it was illegal. In Canada, we did not have any law suspending our laws, so our law remained in force. My organization did a test in November of 2020. So by that time, basically in Canada, public bodies were back to full capacity in terms of the services they were providing. They had managed the COVID issue and they were doing their job. And our test showed that there were lots and lots of delays in responding to requests. However,
Toby, sorry for the interruption, but your time is over.
Okay, just give me one more minute.
No, you already took 6 minutes, but we will have the opportunity to discuss COVID limitations and COVID problems during the part of the discussion. Sorry for that. Now I would like to introduce Ms. Anna Brandt. Ambassador Brandt, who brings more than 30 years of international development experience representing Sweden in diplomatic missions in Kenya, Zambia, and UN agencies, has held leadership positions in the World Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. She is currently the ambassador and head of permanent delegation of Sweden to the OECD and UNESCO, and chairs UNESCO International Program for Development Communication. Ms. Brandt will comment to the main findings of UNESCO 2021 report, focusing on successes and challenges in implementing access to information law. I will give Ms. Brandt a couple of more minutes because she's not going to be with us in the second part of this panel. Ms. Brandt, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I'm so glad to be with you today to be celebrating this very important day. And just as our host said, I am addressing you today as chairperson of the International Program of Development of Communication within UNESCO, IPDC. This is an intergovernmental program that mobilizes the international community to support free, independent, and pluralistic media, as well as access to information worldwide. In Sweden, my country, we know the benefits of access to information very well. We've had supporting law since the 18th century. Our country's Freedom of the Press Act of 1766 was actually the world's first freedom of information law. And we attach great importance to access of information as a fundamental human right. Ensuring that citizens have a legal framework guaranteeing access to information consistent with international standards and ensuring the effective implementation of this law are two cornerstones of the right to information. These two dimensions are reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, Target 1610, which ensure public access to information and fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. That's how the formulation of Target 1610 reads. And UNESCO is designated as the custodian for tracking the indicator to follow the target. And to do this tracking, and on the mandate of IPDC, UNESCO has developed a survey methodology to measure and to report on the adoption and implementation of access to information guarantees. In November 2020, IPDC's Intergovernmental Council received the first crop of results from that survey. The findings showed that there is a strong need to build countries' capacity to keep records about their performance on access to information. As we all know, what gets measured gets done, and what cannot be measured cannot be improved. This year in 2021, 102 countries have participated in another round of the survey. This level of response is partially a tribute to IPDC's support to member states in data collection and reporting on SDG indicator 16.10.2. With the support of partners, the IPDC has funded capacity development initiatives and awareness-raising efforts in countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Ghana, Indonesia, Mongolia, Morocco, Myanmar, Rwanda, Senegal, and Tunisia, as well as countries in the Latin America region. The response to this year's survey showed and reconfirmed that record keeping remains one of the significant areas needing improvement. The good news from the new survey results is that they show that countries that do have legal guarantees for access to information have better delivery when there is also a dedicated arrangement like an Oversight Information Committee. Looking ahead, while 132 UN member states have now adopted some form of access to information legal guarantee, it appears that states that have not adopted such guarantees or have not yet set up information commissions could increase their level of information to their citizens by doing just that. So we know what needs to be done, and we have the mechanisms to support countries to do it. But monitoring is not an end in itself. It also serves as a means for countries themselves to identify their own weak spots, and thus it provides an incentive for them to improve their legal frameworks, implementation, and enforcement. Good practices collected from Cote d'Ivoire, Indonesia, Mexico, Sierra Leone, Tunisia, and Uruguay provide plenty of examples when information collected during monitoring helped to strengthen the enabling environment of access to information. Also encouraging from the 2021 survey is that there is high international cooperation of professional networks. 80% of the survey respondents are members of the International Conference of Information Commissioners, or the International Ombudsman Institute, or the Red de Transparencia y Acceso a la Información, with all of whom UNESCO enjoys close cooperation. With 9 years left to achieve the SDGs, the world is recognizing that access to information and protecting fundamental freedoms is a thread that runs through and helps enrich the diverse efforts towards 2030 and beyond. The IPDC Council has requested a new report on progress to be tabled in 2023. Based on current momentum, we hope that there will be further evidence of increased development in regard to this key part of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Thanks to the data we now have, it's clear what the gaps are, but also where the potential lies. Thank you very much for your attention and inviting me to participate. I'm very honored to be with you. And unfortunately, I will not be able to stay for the second part of the session, but I wish you very good luck in the discussions ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. I have to say that this meeting is also translated into French. So those who want to hear this meeting in French can do it. I'm changing the language. So now it's my pleasure to invite and present Ms. Ilvana Tachi. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name well. She's the administrator at the Director General of Human Rights and Legal Affairs for Information Society at the Council of Europe, where she focused on internet-related policy. Her interests lie in the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, especially as they related to the internet. Ms. Tachi will talk about the steps being taken to implement the Council of Europe Convention on Access to Official Documents and on the likely impact it will have on this right with Europe and potentially beyond. So, Ilvana, you have the floor, and I will kindly ask you to keep to 5-6 minutes maximum. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. It is for me as well a pleasure to be with you today, and I wish to all of us a thoughtful and memorable Access to Information Day. It's an important moment, I think, to take stock of where we are, and I will try to provide a regional perspective in our discussions from the Council of Europe, an organization of 47 European countries. I will talk about the Council of Europe Convention on Access to Official Documents. It's also known as the Tromsø Convention. I will cover some of the key features of the convention, and then I will move into the ratification, to the state of play with regard to ratifications and the monitoring mechanism of the Tromsø Convention. I was intending to cover the guarantees and limitations of the right to access official documents according to the convention, but maybe I will leave that part for the second part of discussions, Mr. Chairperson, as you are trying to structure the discussions in a dynamic way. So I will start by saying that the Tromsø Convention is the first binding international legal instrument which recognizes a general right of access to official documents held by public authorities. This means that this right is guaranteed to everyone without discrimination. It's not conditional upon the exercise of any particular profession or playing any role in the society, such as media professionals or bloggers or journalists in general. It's not conditional upon the motives of the seeker of access to official documents, nor on the intended use of the information received in response to a request for access. It is guaranteed, according to the Tromsø Convention, regardless of the nationality of the person who is seeking access. That means that a state party to the convention has to guarantee this right to whichever national is under its jurisdiction. When the Tromsø Convention was drafted, it was guided by the principle of identifying amongst the various legal systems in the Council of Europe a core of basic obligatory provisions, which would reflect what was already accepted in the legislation of a number of member states, but at the same time could be accepted by states that did not have such a legislation. As a result, the parties to the Tromsø Convention undertake to implement a set of minimum standards. Since the Tromsø Convention was opened for ratification in 2009, the right to access information has been strengthened at the international level. We see the European Court of Human Rights, which is based here in Strasbourg, being more assertive, more explicit in terms of recognizing the right of access to information as not applying exclusively to NGOs and the press, but applying to, more generally speaking, in a particular set of circumstances. I will not deal with the details of these circumstances. Maybe we can have that discussion later on. Just very briefly mentioning the guarantees of the right of access to official documents according to the Tromsø Convention. It applies to all information recorded in whichever form and drawn up and received by public authorities in whichever form. As I mentioned earlier, the seeker of access to official documents does not have to provide reasons why the information, the access to official documents is asked. There is a principle of prompt processing of requests for access and a principle of the public authority being obliged to provide reasons for refusals of access. There is also a principle of free access or reasonable charges for requests to access official documents. And then there are a set of review procedures, which are principles regarding review procedures, which are envisaged in the Tromsø Convention. I will skip the part on the limitations of the right of access. Maybe we can deal with that later if there is interest to go into this. So I'm moving now into the state of play with regard to ratifications and the monitoring mechanism of the Tromsø Convention. At the moment, we have 11 parties to the Tromsø Convention, and I will mention the countries here. Maybe it's of interest for the audience: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Estonia, Finland, Hungary, Iceland, Lithuania, Norway, Montenegro, the Republic of Moldova, Sweden, and Ukraine. We have also
Ilvana,
7 signatories. Yes.
Sorry, Ilvana, we are almost there with the time, so you want to give some final comments?
I can wrap up very quickly. I will just say that the 2 layers of the monitoring mechanism of the Tromsø Convention, that is the group of specialists composed of independent experts, is in the process of being created by the consultation of the parties, which is the second monitoring body, where all representatives of the state parties sit in their own capacity as state parties. So we are in the process of creating the group of specialists, and hopefully by the end of November, we will have that group in place. So I will stop there, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilvana. I'm sorry for the interruption, but I'm sure that we will have some time for further discussion on the Tromsø Convention. So the last panelist for today is Toby McIntosh. Toby is a senior advisor for IGAs Resource Center, which provides online resource to journalists worldwide. And he's also the current editor of on globaltransparency.net, as well as a steering committee member of FOIAnet, and also an old friend. Toby is going to make comments on progress at the international level in terms of adopting policies on access to information, including comparisons with national laws. Toby, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. I'm very pleased to be here. I am going to try to describe the state of access at intergovernmental organizations. I'll call them IGOs. Although many such organizations have adopted access policies, many have not. And those that exist are often too restrictive and in need of improvement. A new reform drive is necessary. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into why IGOs should be transparent in line with Article 19. In the chat column, I'll post a link to an expanded version of this talk. Many IGOs have adopted access policies, particularly at the international financial institutions, but there are many organizations without access policies, resulting in widely varied levels of transparency. I surveyed openness of 27 UN organizations. Of these 27, only 15 have FOIA-like policies. The most recent body to adopt one was the International Maritime Organization this year. The UN Secretariat isn't setting a very good example by not having an access policy itself. Opposition to greater transparency at IGOs typically comes from member organizations, not IGO officials, who often are supportive. My survey also looked at other elements of transparency, such as whether meetings of key decision-making bodies are open or closed. I found that about half of the meetings are conducted in secret. More positively, most agencies perform better when it comes to proactive disclosure. They reveal agendas and documents in advance of the meetings and issue minutes and documents afterwards. But there are some notable exceptions. A common weakness allows member governments to restrict access to their own document submissions. So, for example, at the World Trade Organization, members' proposals at committee-level meetings are usually non-public. So are crucial draft texts that summarize the state of deliberations. The International Civil Aviation Organization this year started publishing minutes for its council meetings, but they're virtually incomprehensible because the underlying documents are non-public. It's like being told a story with crucial bits of information spoken in a foreign language. Experience with IGO access policies, mostly adopted some decades ago, is revealing weaknesses. One problematical area is being exposed by a large and ongoing study by Publish What You Fund. The researchers are documenting that development finance organizations provide very little information about the considerable investments they make through private sector financial institutions. They perform poorly on sharing information about planned projects with affected community, and they are not transparent about the results of their lending. Experience with access policies at IFIs over time is revealing that they are too restrictive. Here are a few examples from the World Bank. The bank does not redact documents to provide for partial disclosure. The bank is increasingly using a catch-all exceptional circumstances, exemption. The bank's pinch definition of the deliberative process exemption was recently criticized by its own independent appeals panel. At the Green Climate Fund, CSOs asked for basic information about what projects are in the pipeline, but the executive director turned them down, rejecting recommendations from an independent appeals panel. The European Investment Bank is reviewing its transparency policy, but NGOs, the Airhouse Convention Secretariat, and the EU Ombudsman are all concerned that the proposed changes are regressive. Other common weaknesses at IFI disclosure policies include the overuse of commercial interest exemptions, allowing governments to veto the release of their documents, and restrictions on the release of monitoring and audit reports. International organizations pledged to build transparency into their responses for COVID-19. The verdict is still out on this, but many contracts to buy COVID vaccines are being kept secret, completely or substantially. I have a few suggestions that I'll make in my accompanying article, but I would like to suggest, in addition to the right to know declaration that's being developed, to call on UNESCO member states to advocate and support their efforts to bring greater access to information at international and regional intergovernmental organizations. That concludes my remarks, Eduardo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toby, and thanks for using very well your time. So now we are going to see some video testimonials from Palestine, Mexico, and Uganda. So I ask my fellow colleagues at UNESCO to broadcast the video.
The right of access to information as a Palestinian journalist is very important to grow integrity and transparency and, of course, accountability, because we need some consequences to hit people's actions in our society.
I urge government entities to respect the provisions of our constitution and of our law, the Access to Information Law, and the regulations thereof, to be proactive in providing information to the citizens.
Thank you very much. It's really important to have testimonials from people coming from all around the world, activists that have been working for the implementation and for the enjoyment of the fundamental human right of access to public information. Thanks, UNESCO, to put these testimonies on the screen. So now we are moving to the second part of this panel. The second part of this panel, I would like to have a fluid interaction and discussion among all the panelists here. So for that reason, I will try to trigger the discussion, putting on the table some questions. And because I stopped Toby Mendel a little bit abruptly when he was talking about the COVID-19 period and the problems of access to information. I would like to asking him and others, and I beg you to use 1 to 2 minutes, and again, to have a fluid and dynamic discussion. And I would like to ask, what are some of the opportunities for access to information as we start to head into the normal COVID period? For example, can we expect some bump from greater pickup of technology, the use of technology? But Toby Mendel, you have the floor. You were mentioning us the problem with COVID-19. So I would like to hear something about that. And if your colleagues want to react on that as well, I would appreciate it. Toby Mendel, you have the floor.
Thanks, Eduardo. I think that we're hopeful. What we have seen in societies around the world is that COVID has brought about much greater engagement with technology. I think that what we're doing right now, would have been difficult before COVID. People weren't tuned into it in the same way. Not that technology has developed, but our engagement with it. And so access to information can be vastly improved. You can leapfrog forward in terms of access to information if you rely on technology for making and responding to requests in particular. So I think there's a hope that might have a positive bump on access to information. I can't say that we've seen a lot of evidence of that yet, but let's see. We can hope.
Thank you. I'm not sure who wants to follow Toby Mendel comments. Probably the other Toby McIntosh. Thank you.
I'll just offer a couple of quick thoughts. The use of virtual meetings by organizations, I think, from the very lowest levels of government to the very highest levels of government, I think is providing an experience which will allow them to think about, including the public, in meetings that haven't been allowed to participate before because they were not online. I think that's a very interesting opportunity. And also the question of COVID contracts, I think, still remains. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the information about COVID contracting is being restricted because of commercial secrecy and agreements between the purchasers and the suppliers, mainly at the insistence of the producers. And that's an issue that is continuing and unresolved.
And Ilvana, coming from the Council of Europe, any comments on this new normality after the COVID-19 period?
Yes. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown, among many other aspects, the need for reliable information. There is vast information which is available, accessible to people, mostly via social media. But there is also concern about disinformation and misinformation in that sphere, in that public sphere. So the right to access information, notably the right to access official documents in the way it has been framed in international instruments, notably in the Tromsø Convention, which is the perspective I want to bring in these discussions, provides an opportunity for states to inject, to input into the public sphere precisely information on their own initiative, which is reliable, which is evidence-based, which is trustworthy for internet users or social media users. So really taking up that provision, for example, of the Tromsø Convention that public authorities should provide information on their own initiative is an opening and an opportunity opening to influence the public debate in a positive manner and to try and tackle disinformation. Thank you.
Can I just jump in, Eduardo?
Of course. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the whole issue of the relationship between disinformation and the right to information. And of course, the disinformation tsunami is not the new thing, and it's not a COVID product, although it has At least the claims are that it's become worse during COVID. A few years ago, the special rapporteurs adopted a joint declaration on fake news and disinformation, basically, and they made the point very strongly that it's absolutely incumbent upon public authorities to put out good, reliable, verifiable, if you will, information. And I think one of the things that's happened during COVID, even in countries where leaders were trying to do their best, but they did, unfortunately, still push out a lot of information which wasn't fake news, but wasn't actually scientifically sustainable because, we didn't have the science. So they were trying to do something in the early stages of COVID. So they were forced to say something, but they often pretended that it was more scientifically based than it was, even if science was leaning that way, but they exaggerated that. And I think that undermined, even in my own country, Canada, for example, which has had a fairly good track record on COVID. So I think that has really undermined the relationship of trust, basically, with public authorities. So something needs to be done about that.
Thank you, Toby. I really don't want to concentrate on the discussion on news and disinformation, but I think that it's a very, very important topic, and I agree with you that sometimes the statements coming from public officials or public figures contribute to this problem that we put under the title of fake news. We just finished a report or a paper coming from the Institute specifically on that, and focusing not only on regulations of disinformation, but focusing more on the obligation of public officials to say the truth and not to create this environment of disinformation. But Toby McIntosh, you're working with journalists, and I want to give you some minutes to say something about the problem of disinformation and the relation of access to information. If you want to jump to this discussion, we have some initiative coming from journalists like fact check and these kind of things that you well know better, and maybe you can say something before you move to another issue. And by the way, we are receiving very good questions coming from the public, and I would ask more people to make more questions. Toby McIntosh,
Thank
you
you.
want to say something about this?
Yes, of course. It is an incredibly important topic, and there really is nothing better in journalism than to have solid facts that you can verify from reliable sources, including government when the evidence is available. And so, getting a hold of that kind of information really improves reporting. I was recently watching a panel where they were talking about and actually wondering about whether journalists are relying on FOIA. And there are examples. I read examples every day where great stories are based on results from FOIA requests. So. Being able to get government information, and of course, for governments to put out good information is important too. But being able to dive into government information and report on it, I think, helps journalists incredibly and serves the public in many, many ways.
Thank you, David. So let's move to another topic that, in some way, you mentioned, some of you mentioned during your presentation. Do you think that domestic laws influence or did influence treaties and vice versa? What is the relationship between domestic laws and access to information and treaties and vice versa? So my question is, what would be the better advocacy activity? I mean, to influence the change of domestic laws, and then domestic laws change or trigger international treaties, or the contrary? What's your opinion about that? And you mentioned, in your presentation, countries that already adopted access to information laws. I don't know who want to start.
Well, I'll just jump in on that a little bit, because most intergovernmental organizations should have access policies of their own. They're called different things, but they really are it's necessary to have them adopted at the institutional level. I'm not sure that most domestic laws prohibit getting documents that are sent by the government to an intergovernmental organization, although that sometimes occurs. That's an interesting area. In the U.S., I've been able to get documents sent by the government to intergovernmental organizations, but I think in other countries they would block that. I'm not sure that's the exemptions in country laws that probably prohibit that are probably varied, but I'm sure that they do exist and get used. It's not unfortunately the overall topic of trying to hold intergovernmental organization and accountable, and the process of trying to understand what your government is doing within the context of an intergovernmental organization is a fairly narrowly reviewed area. I didn't say that very elegantly, but people need to spend more time trying to figure out what their governments are saying in areas on important topics like climate change, as it's being handled by the International Maritime Organization or the Civil Aviation Organization. Those are all very important discussions going on, and often, unfortunately, very much in private. And so, if you're going to hold your country accountable to for the positions it takes, you're going to need to try to figure that out. And just one last quick thing: some of the countries which have FOIA laws themselves are often opponents to opponents to transparency in intergovernmental organizations, which is a little peculiar.
Thank you, Tony.
Can I jump in? I mean,
Of course.
I think that the recognition under international law that access to information was a human right, and that was basically treaty-based, but general human rights treaty-based, not dedicated treaties like the Tromsø Convention, like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the European and Inter-American conventions. I think that had a huge positive impact on the adoption of laws, and not only on the adoption of laws, but also the quality of those laws. So in your region, for example, as you know very well, when the Inter-American Court of Human Rights declared in 2006 that this was a part of the right to freedom of expression, I mean, that just sent, waves around. And I think that, I work in a lot of countries trying to get them to adopt laws, and the fact that it's a human right, it resonates with citizens, it certainly resonates with activists. And I think it's been a big push. In terms of more dedicated treaties, so far we only have the Tromsø Convention, so it's a little difficult to tell with that. And I'm going to throw out something which Ilvana may want to react to, but I was involved, and other civil society organizations were involved in negotiating the Tromsø Convention. And what we saw there, and of course within Europe, where that convention primarily, or for now, applies, although there's a potential for it being expanded. All of the countries, every single country except Belarus, has a law already. But what we saw in the negotiation was that many countries were trying to ensure that the treaty was modest enough that it didn't require them to make any changes to their own national legal systems. That was a specific negotiating tactic of several of the countries. So I think it's great to have this dedicated treaty. I think it's very, very important. I'm not sure, and certainly some countries are not up to that level, but I think most European countries won't have to make so many changes to bring themselves into line with that. But I'd be really interested to hear how Ilvana, that's a little bit of a throwing the gauntlet down. Maybe Ilvana would like to react to that.
Ilvana, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you for that comment. Indeed, the Tromsø Convention is the only international dedicated treaty to access to official documents. And as I said in my introductory remarks, it does represent a minimum standard international instrument. That is true. But that can inspire states European or non-European states to develop the national legal frameworks in line with the standards, with this set of minimum standards of the convention, and to even go beyond that. Now, the potential of the convention is, I think, twofold. First of all, it's a convention of the Council of Europe, sitting in Strasbourg, where the European Court of Human Rights also has its seat. And the European Court of Human Rights also looks at these international instruments, conventions, whenever it adjudicates on cases relating to freedom of expression and access to information as a component of it. So it would not be inconceivable that the European Court of Human Rights, in its jurisprudence, will refer to the Tromsø Convention and will perhaps develop in a more progressive way the right to access to information in its jurisprudence. Second, the Tromsø Convention has, as I said, its monitoring body. One component of it is independent experts. Their task, according to the convention, is to monitor the implementation of the convention in the state parties. But that body, that group of specialists, will be also a forum for dialogue, a forum for sharing experiences, sharing ideas about how to develop further the right to access official documents. It's not only a peer review body, but it's also, let's say, if I may use these words, it could be considered as a think tank in terms of developing the right to access official documents in an intergovernmental framework within the framework of an international treaty. So these I would see as potential, let's say, avenues for the Tromsø Convention having really an impact, a positive impact in the states which are parties to the convention, but also states which might wish to become parties to the convention.
Thank you very much. And I would like to make a comment and probably trigger another discussion. Let's jump to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean and come to the Americas. In our experience at the Inter-American System on Human Rights, when the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for the first time did an interpretation saying that the access to information is a human right that was included in the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, that triggered a lot of discussion in the Latin American countries, particularly, and including in the case of Chile, for example. They implemented the new law right after the decision of the Inter-American Court. And the other thing that triggers that decision of the Inter-American Court, so I'm glad to hear what Ilvana was saying, that probably the Tromsø Convention will be also part of the interpretation of the European Court of Human Rights and include this as a human right in a very strong way, doing an interpretation of the Tromsø Convention. But it is true, the Tromsø Convention is the only international treaty regarding on this topic, but in the Americas, after the decision of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, we worked, I say we because some of the people in the panel, including myself, we were working on what we call the model law of access to public information that was in some way adopted, the model law 2.0, adopted by the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. Of course, I know something about international law. This is not hard law, it is soft law, the resolution of the OES, but it's a little bit more than a very soft law because it was adopted by the countries. So it's something that we have in hand now in Latin America to do good implementation of the right to access to information. But my question here after this comment is, do you think that we need a more international treaty? Do you think that we need some sort of discussion at the UN level to have a treaty establishing that access to information is a human right with clear exceptions, oversight bodies, and all of the things that have the Tromsø Convention or the model law? Or do you think that that could open a Pandora box and we don't know exactly what will happen during intergovernmental discussion on this topic? So I don't know if someone want to take the bottom and start with this discussion. Toby Mendel?
Or, I think that, personally, as an advocate, I would love to have a strong international convention. It would be wonderful. But I think we have to be very sort of realpolitik when we talk about this kind of thing. If we look at the negotiation of the Tromsø Convention in a region where practically every country had a law, in a region where there was, a lot of very strong advocate countries. Anna from Sweden is not with us anymore, but, her country, for example, was very, very strong in pushing for a good convention. We got a reasonably good convention, a strong convention, but Ilvana has said, of course, minimum standards as a treaty is. You have to at least get to that level. But I think it would be quite dangerous at this particular geopolitical moment for advocates to sort of naively run for or aim for a global convention. I think the chance that we would get a strong convention is low, to be perfectly honest. And we have a pretty strong set of international standards which we can rely on, including soft law like the model Latin American law, of which there's also one in Africa, including numerous statements, authoritative statements by other soft law actors like the special rapporteurs on freedom of expression, which have adopted joint declarations, and UNESCO statements, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of soft law, and you yourself have been involved in generating some of that. And I think that, for now, it's probably more prudent to rely on that. Getting laws up to that standard is, we have a lot of material to work with in terms of pushing laws upwards, and including strong laws now in practically every region. Well, I would say in every region. So you can point to neighboring countries and say, look, that guy is doing it. Why can't you? I think this would be a more strategic way for us to go. Can I just make a slightly unrelated point, but on the relationship between these different factors? And again, and Toby McIntosh may wish to respond to this, but what we have not seen, I feel very much, is the impact of national laws on intergovernmental organization policies. So the intergovernmental organization policies, as Toby McIntosh said, are generally pretty weak. In fact, I don't know any of them that really is very strong. And yet we have lots and lots of strong laws. There are a number of areas where intergovernmental organization policies, IGO policies, simply fail to come up to the standard that's fairly established among national laws. As an advocate who have worked in that space, I find that pretty frustrating. I don't know if Toby, why the IGOs can't, come up to at least the medium level national laws. It's a bit surprising to me. I don't know if Toby has a view on that. Or anyone, of course.
Toby McIntosh, do you want to jump to this issue? International covenant and the topic that Toby Mendel mentioned.
Toby's the expert on international affairs, really, but I think I completely agree that it would be a wasted energy, and that there's so many other things to be accomplished in terms of improving national laws and improving the implementation of national laws. There's just so much work to be done there. I think that intergovernmental organizations really need a push. It's just a kind of a vacuum area, and there are lots of NGOs who care a lot about it, but don't have quite the bandwidth to put into it. The Publish What You Fund work is really quite interesting. It's being done in a cooperative way with the IFIs, which is kind of a different approach, very non-confrontational way of involving them. They haven't named names when they do their research. They might next year, but they're doing that in a purposeful way to try to encourage them and also to understand their motivations in terms of not releasing certain kinds of information. So they're doing it in a very cautious way, but just take a different kind of approach. NGOs, we tend to bang on the table a bit, but there is experience being developed, as I was trying to say, from the IFIs and other intergovernmental organizations, which isn't terribly favorable. I think that's part of the story that I'm trying to tell, and I'm hoping that people will start to pay a little more attention to those kinds of holes in transparency.
Ilvana, you raise your hand to jump to this conversation.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say that to address your question about whether we need an international treaty or not, we do have an international treaty, which is the Tromsø Convention, and I'm repeating myself, it's a minimum standard treaty, but it's perhaps at this stage the best we can get out of international negotiations in this area. And that convention is actually open to accession by non-European, non-Council of Europe member states, and international organizations as well can accede to this convention. So that it's an opportunity for this convention to become a global instrument, and this wouldn't be the first Council of Europe international treaty that would provide opportunities for non-European countries. We have the Data Protection Treaty, we have the Cybercrime Convention, which are very well advanced in terms of accession by non-European, non-Council of Europe member states. So I just wanted to put that to the discussions, an aspect of the Tromsø Convention which already exists.
Thank you, Ilvana. When I mentioned international convention, international treaty, I mentioned that the only one treaty that is international, an international convention, is the Tromsø Convention, but I was thinking at the UN level, not at the regional level, though I totally understand how the Tromsø Convention might influence the rest of the world in the same way that Convention 108 for data protection or the Budapest Convention for cybercrime. All of those conventions are coming from the Council of Europe, and some people can criticize that under the title the Brussels effect. No, the intention of some standards only coming from Europe to the rest of the world. But I'm not want to open that discussion, and that was the reason why I was asking the possibility to have an international treaty coming from the UN, where many other countries can have or could be involved in the discussion. But I would like to finish this discussion with a short question after hearing you about, the role that can different actors that different actors can play in this field. And I listened Toby, the two Tobys, that having an international agreement coming from the UN is not feasible or it's not good. So my final question to you before going to the question of the audience is, so what can different actors like civil society, UNESCO, other IGOs, oversight bodies can do to help the world to build back better in this area? Very short comment, and we are going to go to make some questions coming from the audience. Who want to jump there?
Let me jump perhaps first and talk about what UNESCO can do, because I think the inclusion of access to information among the SDGs is a huge opportunity. Countries, when you talk about human rights and right to information, sometimes leaders, get defensive or turn off. But when you look at it from a development perspective among all of the other SDGs, and they're working hard on that. And also, I think it's quite nice that the SDGs don't say you have to do this, but they're looking at if you make progress in the area. So instead of saying you have to go to here, minimum standard, instead we're saying, okay, you're here. What are you going to do to improve? So every country can work on that. So I think that, it's very, very important for UNESCO to continue and perhaps even become more developed in the way it's monitoring performance of countries and to provide assistance, hopefully with, of course, support from other players. I think that would be a very important role to play. And of course, for civil society, obviously, for us to continue to engage with that, to support UNESCO, to support governments that are trying to do something, and to advocate and to pressure governments which are a bit reluctant. So there seem to be some key opportunities, really, SDGs focus, really.
Toby, would you like to add something?
Just a couple quick things then, Eduardo. I'd just like to put in a plug for FOIA-Net's strategy for monitoring by in country. We have produced a model for how to do that. And I think that's an extremely important parallel component with the UNESCO study of implementation. And so that's something I think needs to be supported and it needs to be generated from within countries, but also needs to be supported by actors who have the wherewithal to help with that. I think just one quick comment then, the amount of funding that would be valuable in countries to help them adopt or improve the implementation of laws, I think is quite minimal and should be examined as a topic. We do a lot of international work on this, but I think funding at the national level, even subnational level, would be quite advantageous and an economical investment.
Thank you, Toby. Ilvana, you want to say something on this topic?
Yes, what can be done from a Council of Europe perspective, again, Tromsø Convention is the reference point for the Council of Europe bodies. The Secretary General makes reference to it in her interventions, in her exchanges with various states, member states of the Council of Europe. The Commissioner for Human Rights also makes reference to it in her comments, in her interaction and exchanges with states. So there is really an awareness-raising activity taking place there about the standards of the Tromsø Convention. Another level in which we promote the standards of the Tromsø Convention and of access to official documents is in the so-called, we call them cooperation activities with specific member states or groups of member states. These are technical assistance activities whenever draft laws are being prepared to revise the existing legal framework. There are training activities organized with public officials. There are exchanges between countries, for example, in the Western Balkans countries, there or in other regions, sub-regions, let's say, of the Council of Europe. There are exchanges promoted in the form of network of public authorities. So there is that dimension of capacity building in our member states as well with regard to these standards on access to official documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilvana. Now we are going to the questions coming from the audience. We received very good and very interesting questions. Unfortunately, we will not have enough time for all of them. So I choose 3 questions, one for each of you, to start finishing with this panel. So for Toby Mendel, there is a question that you mentioned something, but maybe you want to expand. What can UNESCO and stakeholders do to urge the remaining 60, more or less, countries to adopt right to information laws? For Toby McIntosh, social networks need to deal with freedom of expression and access to information. How should one address social networks' power that might destroy what is access to information in a safe and serene way. And for Ilvana, access to information as international instrument is being promoted not only by the Aarhus Convention, the Tromsø Convention, but also by different conventions dealing with fighting corruption, environmental information. Do you think it is time to put some international standard obligations to provide access to information in the field of health, particularly? And with these three questions, we will finish with this great panel. So I appreciate that you be short in your answering. Toby Mendel, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that if you look at the countries that still need to adopt laws, we can roughly categorize them into two groups. Firstly, there are small, mainly island states that haven't quite gotten around to doing this, I think that UNESCO can play a big role there. And one of the roles that I think UNESCO can play, and working with civil society as they often do, is to try to develop tools that make it reasonable for small states to implement these laws. For example, I'm currently working with UNESCO in Samoa. It's the country of Samoa. It's a country of 200,000 people. Very challenging for them to put in place all of the machinery for the right to information. So we're trying to think of innovative ways to make it easier for them. And then you have the other group is those states which are still showing reluctance, even though they're not very small states. It's difficult to get those states to move on a lot of human rights issues, generalizing, but still. And so I think that there will be challenges with that. There will just be some states that never do it, because they don't really believe in human rights and they don't want to do those kinds of things. And there are still a few other states which just haven't quite gotten around to it yet, and UNESCO needs to really try to put pressure on them. So I think that's kind of a bit of a roadmap for that.
Thanks, Toby. Toby McIntosh on social networks, very briefly, please.
That's a tricky one. They're so important that it's interesting to watch some of their reports. Some of the reports about what they have done to try to accomplish goals that they've set out. Some of the reports are not very very adequate. I think that it's an area that needs more research. Try to figure out what their obligations for reporting are. Their accountability is undoubtedly going to be partly dependent on what we know about what they do, and unfortunately, that's currently rather limited.
Thanks, Toby. Finally, very important issue: international treaties, access to information, and the right to health as well. Ilvana, do you want to say something on that?
Yes, thank you. It's a very important question. Now, as far as information regarding health issues, health questions, which is held by public authorities, by the government and the administration, whether at the regional or local level or at the national level, this is already covered by the Tromsø Convention. So it really falls within the scope of the Tromsø Convention. From that perspective, there would not be an immediately obvious need to develop another international treaty which has a limited scope to information concerning health issues. This question would be addressed by the existing provisions of the Tromsø Convention.
Thanks, Ilvana, and I would like to add there that health data is personal data and is sensible personal data, and it's also included in the Convention 108 Plus. So there is a dialogue between. I was part of the bureau of the Convention 108. There is a dialogue between the Tromsø Convention and the Convention 108. Just because of that, the importance of accessing health data and the problem with personal data. So, okay, we finish with this part of the panel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the panelists. But before we end, some important information. There is an initiative to adopt in the course of next year a declaration on access to information. So I would like to ask the chair of FOIANet, Toby Mendel, to comment on the first draft that was received. And if you can give some few comments, Toby, in a few minutes, I would appreciate.
Thank you, Eduardo. I think I'm going to focus primarily now on why this declaration is so important at this time. We have already discussed on this panel how during the COVID period, on the one hand, there was sort of an attack on the right to information by some states. They just canceled the law or stopped applying it, whether by law or not. But on the other hand, I think never before, at least in the 25 plus years I've been working on this issue, never before can I say that in the public mind has the importance of access to information been so clear and so strong. So that, I would say, is really a huge opportunity for the right to information. For the first time, really, citizens in every country are feeling the importance of access to information. And never before did they thirst for information, feel that access to information was, almost a matter of life and death for them, as they did during COVID. So this is a big building block for us to build on. I think that we've had declarations before on access to information. This would not be the first one. UNESCO itself has adopted declarations, for example, in 2016, which is the 250th anniversary of the Swedish-Finnish first law. The World Press Conference World Press Conference Day was on the 3rd of May. UNESCO adopted the Finlandia Declaration, which is all about access to information. But I think that adopting a declaration now is really important for several reasons, which I'll quickly outline. Firstly, I think it's super important to reaffirm in the, let's call it, new normal of COVID about the importance of this right. Citizens feel it, but governments are not necessarily reacting to that. They're not doing what they should be doing in this space. Secondly, I think it's very important at this point to set out how we need to move forward on this issue, including to address COVID setbacks, so to reclaim, but as the title of the day from UNESCO has mentioned, building back better, not just back to where we were. How can we use the new tools that have been, I think, facilitated, as I mentioned before, by COVID, and just generally as we go forward as a global community on this issue, as our understanding of this issue improves, so building back better. Again, to take advantage, the third reason this is important, to take advantage of the current climate, to emphasize yet again how important the right to information is for development, for human rights, for sustainable development, and for the respect for all other human rights. I mean, the crucial importance of this right for so many other social interests. Health is very front of people's mind at the moment, but all of these other issues as well. I won't make detailed comments on the declaration itself. I have looked carefully at the draft. I think that UNESCO and colleagues it's been working with has done a great job in preparing a first draft, but that's been sort of an inside draft for now. I think the next step must be to consult widely on that draft. And I would say that there are two key objectives to that, as with any process of consultation, really, to further improve the draft. And it's a strong draft, but obviously there's the scope for improvement. That's always the case. But also to promote widespread ownership over that and buy-in to that. So my final comment as chair of FOIANet on the one hand, and as the executive director of the Center for Law and Democracy on the other hand, I really look forward to working with UNESCO on this. And I think that if we manage to produce a strong, clear, forward-looking declaration, we can somehow provide a roadmap for the world to go forward on this issue for the next 5 or 6 or 8 years. So it's really an opportunity, I see.
Thank you very much, Toby. Thanks for your comment. And I would like, we are on time. So before formally closing this panel, I would like to kindly ask Mr. Tawfiq Jelassi, the Assistant Director General for Communication and Information, if you want to say something before closing the panel. I would really appreciate that you were attending this important panel for all the time that was held. So, Assistant Director General.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, for giving me the floor again. I'll be very brief, and Mr. Toby just mentioned the Windhoek Plus 30 declaration that was adopted this past May in Namibia in conjunction of UNESCO celebration of the World Press Freedom Day. I want to add to that, this declaration is so important. It's a Windhoek Plus 30 since the original one was adopted 30 years ago. The new declaration is so important in ensuring universal access to information, in fostering the freedom of expression, in strengthening the safety of journalists, and our fight against impunity for crimes committed against journalists. I want to add here by saying it's our intention to submit to the 41st session of the UNESCO General Conference, which will take place this coming November, to submit to them the Windhoek Plus 30 declaration to be adopted officially by the UNESCO General Conference as a declaration. And for us, this is a strong message that we want to convey to all 193 member states of UNESCO, that this is so important. Information as a public good, freedom of expression, but also information as a good for the public. Not only as a public good, it's also a good for the public with all its stakeholders, governments, NGOs, civil society, academia, private sector, and the like. So I'm glad that this was mentioned. Of course, we'll celebrate next May. It will be in Montevideo, Uruguay, the 2022 World Press Freedom Day. And we hope that with these building blocks, we can strengthen the universal access to information, freedom of expression, and safety of journalists. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jelassi. And because of the World Press Freedom Day will be, hosted will be happen next year in Montevideo, our regional office of the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights will be more than happy to help UNESCO to the organization of this very, very important event. So we finished with this great panel. I would like to thank all the panelists first for their contributions, and also for your important inputs for the discussions for the celebration of this International Day. And also I would like to thank the audience, the questions. Unfortunately, we could not answer all the questions, but it was a very, very interesting panel. I am Eduardo Bertoni, the representative and coordinator of the Regional Office for South America of the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights, and I was the moderator of this panel. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon. We close formally with this panel. Thank you, everybody.